tell. I did the Iditarod Trail.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Husky Talk. Our guest today has been involved with the Iditarod for over 15 years with the Iditarod Air Force. He is the chief pilot in McGrath, one of the Iditarod checkpoints and airport hub. He lives in Alaska and is a FedEx pilot when not volunteering for the Iditarod. Please welcome to the show, Wes Erb.
All right, that sounds great.
Hello, Wes, and welcome to the show.
Well, hello, and thank you for having me today.
Before we get started, can you start off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, my name is Wes Erb, and this year I am acting as the Iditarod Air Force chief pilot, and I live in Flat Lake, which is Flat Lake, Alaska, which is a couple hours north of Anchorage, and I've lived in Alaska for a little over 30 years now.
So we know you are a pilot and you work for FedEx. What got you interested in being a pilot?
I would have to credit my father for that. He was a builder by trade, but he always loved flying and aviation. And I remember he had an airplane when we were growing up, a little airplane, and he took me flying when I was about 6 years old, I guess. And I remember that day now, just the first time that I'd ever been flying. And I just remember it just amazed me that we could fly and see the farm from up in the sky and the mountains. And it was really beautiful. It just struck me. And I think then I knew I wanted to fly. And then later on, I figured out I could make money flying, because that was even better.
Being a pilot gives you the chance to volunteer for the Iditarod Air Force. Let's talk a little bit about the Iditarod Air Force. Can you start off by telling us what the IAF is?
Sure. And it's a really interesting thing, because a lot of people know about the Iditarod race. It's a dog sled race from Anchorage, Alaska, all the way up to Nome, Alaska. But it covers over 1,000 miles through mostly remote interior Alaska, where there are no roads, no way to get there. Well, if you're going to support a race like this and have mushers go to all these remote checkpoints, the only way to get the people and the food and the fuel and the tents and to move dogs around and veterinarians and all the people that are required, you have to do it by airplane. So when the race first started, they actually started with just one pilot. His name was Larry Thompson. And Larry Thompson had a Cessna 180, and he supported the whole race all by himself, moving all the dog food and bales of hay and things like that. Over the years, it's grown. Now we have anywhere between 20 and 25 pilots that volunteer each year to show up. They bring their own airplanes, and the Iditarod buys the gas for them, and we provide support for the whole race. So all the logistics and all the things that are required to put on a race 1,000 miles long basically goes in little airplanes up and down the trail. And the Iditarod Air Force is just that collection of volunteer pilots who come together every year to fly the race. And some of our pilots have been flying the race now for, over 30 years. I myself have been flying the race for maybe about 20 years. But once you get started doing it, it's a lot of fun. And so we have the same guys come back every year, mostly. And you don't get paid, but you have a lot of fun doing it. So that's why people keep coming back.
Has the Iditarod Air Force been a part of the race since its start 50 years ago?
Yes, it has. And in fact, you could not have one without the other. We really have symbiotic relationship here. The Iditarod race simply could not be put on without air support. And the Iditarod Air Force couldn't be without support from the Iditarod. So we need each other, and it's a very good, healthy relationship. But yes, the Iditarod Air Force has been, since the very first pilot, Larry Thompson, back in '73, I think he was the first guy. And so there's always been an Iditarod Air Force as long as there's been an Iditarod.
How did you get involved with the Iditarod Air Force?
It's kind of a funny story. I used to take my airplane and just fly up and down the trail, watching the dogs go by and watching the mushers. I really enjoyed Iditarod. I was just watching it as a fan. But one day I was in McGrath, Alaska. It's one of our major hubs for the Iditarod. And I ran into a friend of mine who was working in Iditarod Air Force. And what I noticed is he got to go up to the fuel pump and he filled up his tanks. It didn't cost him anything. They were letting him stay in the bunkhouse that was warm and dry, and they were feeding him 3 meals a day. At the same time, I was in a tent. It was really cold and the gas was expensive. And I realized he had a lot better setup than I did. So I asked then, how can I be a part of the Iditarod Air Force? And back then it was a lot easier to get on. I just talked to the chief pilot and he said, sure, show up next year. And so I did. And I've been flying ever since. We now have a lot more, I think, a professional process of finding new pilots, and we go through their background and history and make sure that they're qualified and the most competent pilots we can find for the race.
Here he answered.
Oh, he did, didn't he?
Yeah.
Okay, what did he say?
What kind of plane do you and most of the other pilots fly?
Most of our aircraft are all the same type. They're called Cessna 180s or Cessna 185s. They are kind of small airplanes. They're 4 passengers. They're all tailwheel aircraft for the most part, which means they have 2 wheels up in front and then a little tail wheel in the back. And for the most part, we put them on skis. So these out of the 21 aircraft that we have, I think 18 of them are 180s or 185s on skis. So we can go in and out of these ski strips quite well. We do have a few aircraft that are used to move passengers around and big bulky items. And those are, one of them is a Cessna 206, which is a kind of a larger Cessna, but it's got just a regular landing gear on it, 3 wheels, but it can haul a lot of stuff. And then we also have a couple of Piper Saratogas, and these Saratogas are good at hauling passengers. So we can put 3 passengers each in these airplanes and move them around very efficiently. So it depends on what job we're doing, depends on what airplane we send for that job.
Since you're flying in remote Alaska, are there any necessities you bring with you?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Since you're flying in remote Alaska, are there any necessities that you always carry with you?
Yes, it's a very good question, because the places we're going, there's not a lot of support. There's no one out there. So you have to fly to at least be able to take care of yourself in the event that you either need to stop short of your destination, or if you had a mechanical problem and you had to land, or if you get bad weather and you have to land to wait out bad weather. So all the pilots carry basic survival gear with them, which usually works out to be a small tent, a small heater to stay warm with, some food, really good sleeping bags, a small first aid kit, things of that nature that would allow you to stay overnight in the cold winter without support and survive over the night. So every pilot has something different, but there's a basic survival gear that they carry. In addition to, you always need a bag of tools because there's things that break along the way, and so you need a set of tools as well. So the pilots, all that I know, they all carry a little tool bag and a survival kit.
What are some challenges in being a volunteer for the Iditarod Air Force?
The challenges from the pilot point of view is one is trying to find the time off because it is a long race. The winter takes 9 days and the race moves over a period of couple weeks. So it's sometimes a challenge to find enough time in your life to dedicate to go fly for 2 weeks at a time. But some of the more, I guess, challenges that might come day to day are the flying that we do. It can be very cold. There are many times, especially in the interior of Alaska, when we're flying around, it's minus 40 degrees. And at minus 40, it's hard to get anything to work. So we have to be real careful about how we treat the airplanes and how we preheat the airplanes so that they'll work. So the cold is definitely a big challenge. Weather is the other challenge. The weather in Alaska can change very quickly, and there's not a lot of weather stations to tell you what's going on. So many times you'll have to go hundreds of miles without really knowing what the weather is along the way. So you're constantly judging, is the weather good? Is it changing? Do I need to turn around? Do I need to go to a different destination? So weather is another big one that's a challenge. And then the third is there's just not a lot of landing areas, especially with fuel. So you have to make sure that when you take off, you have enough fuel to go to where you're going or divert to another place, because there's just not that many places to land. You're going to have to figure out, always have a plan B in case you can't get to your original destination.
Have you had any plane troubles while flying for the Iditarod?
Oh, I wouldn't say I've had. There's always some challenges to the aircraft, especially when they're that cold. Sometimes you go out to the airplane and the tire's flat. Well, so because it just doesn't like the cold weather. Sometimes the engines don't like to start. Sometimes batteries die, so we have to charge them up. Sometimes the engines have problems. We don't typically have too many aircraft problems in flight. Personally, the most challenging problem I have is when I lost my electric power while flying. Now the engine doesn't need electricity to run, so it ran just fine. But all the electrics in the airplane stop, so you don't have any lights or radio. Your navigational equipment shuts off. So it was really basic flying again, kind of like what they used to do way back in old days. So, but fortunately, I was in an area that I knew very well, so navigation was pretty easy. But that's probably the most problem I have with the airplane. The other problems in flying usually revolve around dogs. Sometimes moving dogs is a very challenging thing because they can get in a fight or cause problems back there, and it's hard sometimes to keep the dogs in line if they're being rambunctious.
Since you're a volunteer, do you provide the fuel and care for your plane?
Partly, it's shared. The Iditarod Air Force pilots show up. They bring their own airplane, and they have maintained that airplane for the whole year. When they show up on Iditarod, Iditarod purchases our fuel for us, so that's good because it's really expensive. And if something breaks during the race, the the race will replace that part for the pilot. So once you start flying for Iditarod, it doesn't cost you any money out of pocket for fuel or for maintenance. I will say after the race, it usually does add up costing the pilot, because the airplanes take a tremendous beating while they're on the race, and you usually don't find that until later on. So I would say I probably spend quite a good amount of money after the race just fixing all the things that have gotten broken or bent.
How does being a pilot for the Iditarod affect your real job?
Well, for my real job at FedEx, it's in a larger airplane. It's an MD-11 aircraft, which it looks like an old DC-10, but they're large aircraft. I mean, they weigh over 600,000 pounds, and we go from Anchorage to China and back. But it's a different kind of flying. It's up in 30,000 feet, and we fly for 8-9 hours at a time. The Iditarod flying is a lot different. It's very close to the ground, and it's very short missions, less than 1 hour, and there's no one really to help you. What I think it brings to my real job is that I take to it a lot of the skills that I've learned in Iditarod about how to fly an airplane safely and reliably, and how to take care of it. And I think it made me a better pilot for FedEx as well. The same things. I know how to take care of the airplane, and I'm always thinking about what's plan B, where can we go? So I think that both of them bring good benefits to the other.
What would you say is the best thing about flying for the Iditarod?
That's a really good question. And I have to think about that every year, because it's a large expense. It costs me a lot of money, costs me a lot of time, costs me a lot of vacation. So there must be something about it that draws me to do it. And I keep coming back to the same two things. Probably the most important thing is the people that I see. You see the same volunteers year after year. And so it becomes like family. You seem like it's a family reunion every year. You see everyone and you get to see them and work with them. And that's the thing that really probably motivates me the most. The second thing is that Alaska is beautiful. It's beautiful to be able to fly around, especially in the winter, and see all of Alaska. And I wouldn't have a reason to do that if it wasn't Iditarod. I probably wouldn't get out as much. And so it gives me the opportunity to see this beautiful state and have someone else put gas in my tank and feed me and give me a warm bunk at the end of the night. So it's a good trade.
Tell us something that people probably don't know about the Iditarod Air Force.
They probably don't even know that it exists for the most part. Most people, I think, tune in and they see the mushers start the race, and they see the mushers come in at Nome, and they see the mushers a little bit in the middle. I think most people don't understand that when they're tuning in to 30, 40, 50 mushers, there's 1,000 volunteers behind them making that possible. And without all those volunteers working, the race just couldn't exist. And I think the Iditarod Air Force is just one section of volunteers that I'm not sure most people even understand that it happens. They just think it's magic, these mushers, when they show up at a checkpoint and all the dog food is there, the bales of hay and straw are there for the dogs to stay warm, their food and the fuel, people are there. They probably don't think, how did all that happen? So I think the Iditarod Air Force is probably one of, certainly a very important segment of Iditarod that people just don't really think about why it's there. And most of the volunteers would probably agree that people watching the race, just as fans, maybe don't understand that there's a much bigger race going on behind them, 1,000 volunteers all working to make sure that those mushers get down the trail. And I think it's a fascinating story, really.
Our final question is the dinner party. You are able to invite 5 Iditarod icons to dinner, living or dead.
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Wow. Wouldn't that be cool to pick 5 people to have dinner with? That, I guess living or dead, that would be great. I would probably start off with Joe Reddington Sr. because he thought of this race and was the father of it. So it would be great to have Joe Reddington Sr. sit down and I could ask him, why did you even think you wanted to do this? That would be great. Another would be, I always liked Libby Riddles. Libby Riddles was the first woman to win the Iditarod and was just a really interesting woman. She's really, to take on that race, was a really big thing back then. So she would be really great to invite to dinner. Let's see. One of my favorite mushers he's a next door neighbor of mine here in Big Lake, Alaska, but his name's Martin Boozer. And Martin Boozer is one of the funniest guys I've ever met as far as mushers go. Great sense of humor, and he embodies, I think, the spirit of the race, and that he really gets involved with promoting it along the trail, getting kids interested. So I think Martin would be a great one. One of the famous guys that I would love to have had a chance. He's not with us anymore, dead, but Herbie Nayukpuk was his nickname was the Shishmaref Cannonball, and he was a very iconic native musher back in the day, and it would be great to talk to him because he would know all the stories about mushing growing up, and when it wasn't really a sport, it was just how they got around. So that would be great. And maybe the last person would be Larry Thompson, because he was the founder of the Iditarod Air Force, and it would be kind of fun to talk to him and just see how did he do the whole race all by himself that first year. That would be kind of interesting to find out. So I guess those would be my top 5.
Thanks so much for talking to us today, Wes.
Oh, it was great to be here. Thank you so much for the interview, and it was great to meet you. And we hope to see you around visiting us here in Alaska and watch the race someday.
Special thanks to our guest, Wes Erb, for being on our show this week. If you enjoyed this episode, please stop by iTunes and leave us a review. It helps with our ratings. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or people you'd like to hear on the show, email us at huskytalk1@gmail.com. If we hear from you if you leave a review, we will read it on the show. We would like to also give credit to Hobo Jim for our intro song, the Iditarod Trail song, and our outro song, Reddington's Run.
In the land of the midnight sun, they call this race the Iditarod Trail. To me, it's Reddington's Run. In my heart, it's Reddington's Run.